Hey, welcome everybody to the Everyday Investor podcast. Today I'm catching up with Rajat Soni. He is a CFA, a chartered financial analyst based in Canada. And in 2023, he sold all of his stocks and bonds and he plowed it all into Bitcoin. He's also very active on X, posting about Bitcoin daily, so much so that he got in trouble recently with the CFA Institute. So we're talking a little bit about that today, and also just what it's like to live more on a Bitcoin standard and what some of the bullish forces are at work for 2025 and beyond. Make sure that you like and subscribe to this episode. Let's get started. Hey, welcome everybody to the Everyday Investor podcast. Today I'm catching up with Rajat Soni. How are you, Rajat?
I'm doing great. How are you?
Very good, very good. Now, I don't know a lot about your backstory. I know you from X. I know that you're a CFA, a chartered financial analyst, but give us a bit of a clue as to the backstory.
So I used to work in finance. I worked in asset management. I would help people to maintain their portfolios. I would help them to increase the value of their portfolios. It would be mostly institutional investors. So let's say insurance companies. So I'd help those institutional investors to invest money into bonds and try to make a return on their savings. So over time, I noticed that a lot of people are making maybe 2, 3%. Keep in mind, I was working there around 2020 to 2020. So the interest rates were extremely low at the time. So people were making 2, 3%. They were paying the bank maybe 0.5% to 1% in terms of fees.
Mm.
So half of their returns were going to the bank, and they were basically not. They weren't even beating inflation at that point. So it got me thinking. Where I'm working right now, I'm just basically a number. Nobody really cares about who I am. Nobody cares about my background. Nobody cares about my goals as an individual. I would personally rather work on helping individuals to become better with their finances. So that's exactly what I did. I started posting on Instagram, I started posting on Twitter, started posting more recently on YouTube with content about personal finance. I started with stocks, with real estate, taught people about how to just the basics of stocks. I don't know if people in your audience have seen my content before, but I would talk a lot about how index funds are great. I would talk about how investment properties are awesome because of passive income. But over time, I started getting a lot of comments from people who were telling me that the returns that you get from index funds are not enough because the money that we have is being destroyed much faster than whatever returns you're getting on your index funds. So if you're earning 10% on your index funds and the money is being destroyed at 15%, you're losing 5%. Maybe that's not the number, maybe those aren't the exact numbers, but over time, it pushed me to start thinking about why people are saying this, why people are thinking about it this way. And I don't know where I saw, I don't know, maybe somebody's story or something like this, maybe a post, but somebody mentioned the Bitcoin standard and I gave it a chance. So I read it, went into it. I've actually read it now maybe 5 times, and I've completely changed my view of where I think the world is going. I no longer think that buying investments like index funds is a smart decision. Maybe for if you have a short time horizon, maybe if you have, even then, it's actually extremely risky because the index funds can lose a significant amount of value. So over time, I've made my, I've gone deeper into how Bitcoin works. I've made my thesis a little bit stronger. Every single day, I'm learning a little tiny bit more. I'm constantly posting about Bitcoin, constantly trying to teach people how Bitcoin works. And I feel more fulfilled doing this. I feel much more fulfilled compared to the job that I was doing as a fixed income analyst. I was making a lot more money then, but now I feel like I'm making a much bigger difference in people's lives.
So you're referring to currency debasement, and I guess you're just a cog in the machine when you're working for the bank, taking orders left, right, and center, and kind of you have your targets, right? But you're not really
That's
probably feeling
exactly it.
fulfilled that you're actually creating the outcomes that people want. So did
Yeah.
that help you to personally appreciate Bitcoin in your own life, or was that really still, were you still thinking just, hey, this could be great for my clients to get in on, or were you thinking about that in your own life as well? Like, I'd like to make a shift over to a different form of money myself.
Yeah, so over time, I once I figured out how Bitcoin works, it took me a really long time to really see it, to figure out where it was going. I think I was first introduced to it in 2021 from that post. I started learning about it, I started reading about it. I still thought it was speculative, it was something useless. I think the good thing about the Bitcoin standard is it makes you explore more about how Bitcoin works. It leaves you with more questions, to be honest, than the questions that it answers because Bitcoin is such a massive topic. There are so many things that you need to discover for Bitcoin to actually make it click in your mind. I think my first post about Bitcoin was at some point in 2022. I started buying Bitcoin in February of 2022, and after that, I think my thesis, my conviction has only grown stronger. And I've, I believe in August of 2023, I sold all my stocks. I got rid of all my index funds. I'd never had rental properties. I got rid of all that to buy Bitcoin. And keep in mind, this is based on a foundation of me just learning and learning and learning and spending thousands of hours learning how this thing works. I would listen to podcasts. I was doing Uber Eats at one point, and while I was doing deliveries, I was listening to Bitcoin podcasts, and that was probably the best way for me to learn
Mm,
because I was being paid. I was essentially being paid to go to school and learn more about Bitcoin, do pretty much another degree because that's how deep Bitcoin goes. I think Bitcoin goes deeper than most of the degrees that people have today. The amount of time that you have to put in is massive, and most people don't have that time. Most people are not going to be that convicted. Most people are going to keep rebalancing. If they have a 1% allocation, turns into 5%, they'll sell the 4% because they don't quite understand where this is going. And over time, for me personally, my conviction just continued to grow. Today, I think that I'm extremely positive, but I guarantee you that over the next year, over the next 5 years, I'll learn more about Bitcoin that makes me even more positive on where this thing is going.
that's awesome. So during that period of time that you were starting to accumulate Bitcoin, it was actually, correct me if I'm wrong, but wasn't necessarily going through a boom phase. It was,
No.
yeah, it was a fairly low point, right? And so your conviction was actually building when the price signal was telling you something contrary to what your growing faith was telling you, right? But
Yeah.
either way, like when you got to August 2023, you sold all of your stocks and you went all in on Bitcoin. So it might be an obvious question for some. Like I'm assuming you're in a relationship and that other person has to kind of agree with whatever you do. So what was that like getting to that point, and was it as scary as it kind of sounds like? Because it does kind of sound a little bit scary to go all in.
She didn't quite agree with me. It was my wife. She didn't quite agree with me. She still owns some stocks herself, but she was okay with my decision, right? She was okay with me making the decision because she trusts my judgment. She knows that I worked in finance. She knows how much I talk about Bitcoin, how much I study Bitcoin. I actually annoy her every single day, telling her, "Hey, Bitcoin's doing this, Bitcoin's doing that." I'm sure every Bitcoiner has that story where their spouse doesn't quite understand it yet, and that's perfectly fine. She has her strengths, I have my strengths. We work perfectly together. She manages money her way, I manage money my way. If Bitcoin doesn't go where I think it's going, we will still have something to rely on, an amount of money to rely on. And I don't think that's going to happen though. I do think that her index funds are going to trend to zero in terms of Bitcoin forever. And I've told her this, and she's okay with it. She wants more stability, more security, and that's perfectly fine. She is stacking Bitcoin. I don't think she would have started stacking Bitcoin without me telling her to, though.
Yeah, well, and this kind of leads me to another question, which is what is the kind of general vibe out there? Would most people have a little bit of allocation towards Bitcoin? And by most people, I mean, I guess I should qualify that a bit more. Would most people from, say, Generation X downwards, would they have at least a little bit of Bitcoin, or is it still kind of early days in terms of adoption over there?
I think we're still extremely early. I don't think most people even have any idea where this thing is going. I've talked to people regularly about Bitcoin, and they still have none. But then there's also people on the other end of the spectrum where because they've heard me talk so much about it, they've started accumulating themselves, and
Mm,
now they're benefiting from it, which I'm so happy for. I really hope that this changes a lot of people's lives.
mm.
I don't. I think we're extremely early. I still think we're very early. 99% of the people that I talk to have no idea what this is. They have no clue. Like if I go, whenever I go to a mall or whenever I go to some kind of event, I always think, how many people here probably own Bitcoin? And maybe I'm wrong here, but I don't think it's more than 5% at any given time.
Yeah. which is amazing, isn't it? Because
Yeah.
when you get, and this must be true with anybody who kind of gets passionate about a certain sort of niche, you surround yourself with voices that, it does kind of reinforce a pre-existing belief set, which can be a little bit dangerous. And one of the side effects of it is that you kind of assume that everybody knows about this. But if only 5% of people actually have an allocation, if that's correct, it says a lot about how much the opportunity is or how stupid we are. And so like I've kind of come to the same conclusion as you have, different avenues, but do you have any sort of major underlying concerns of like, hey, what if this thing happens? Is there anything that makes you doubt the direction that Bitcoin is going in?
So this is something that I'm still learning about. I'm still trying to figure out where this is going. I had a conversation with, not sure if your audience knows him, but Jonathan Carvalho. He was mentioning quite a few things about where Bitcoin could go, what the biggest threats could be. So one of the things that he mentioned was Bitcoin Core being controlled by a very small group of people. Keep in mind, I don't know the details of this. I haven't done the research. It would probably take me a long time to actually get into it. I don't understand the code. I can't read code.
Hmm.
I know people who I trust. They've gone through the code. They've put in the time to read it, and they don't really have a problem with it. But what Jonathan was saying is that because Bitcoin Core is controlled by a very small group of people, they can be corrupted. They can introduce certain things, certain updates that may corrupt the network. And over time, it'll just compound and compound. And most people will not even, they won't even realize it. But I think that may not really be a problem because as long as we can't change the 21 million base supply, I don't see anything else really changing how Bitcoin works or destroying how Bitcoin works. Maybe quantum computing, but again, quantum computing would be something that destroys the legacy financial system much quicker than it would destroy Bitcoin because the legacy financial system has how much? $900 trillion worth of wealth in it. Why would somebody not use their power with quantum computing to extract $900 trillion worth of wealth when Bitcoin is only worth 2 trillion? So I don't think that should be a real big problem. A lot of people still think, oh, if the electricity goes down, electricity grid goes down, if we have no more internet. But these things, again, it comes from a place of ignorance. But think about how many things we use electricity for today. When you think of that logically, I don't think we'll survive if electricity stops working the way that it does today. I don't think we're going to get anywhere. I think we're probably going to be dead within 6 months to a year at most. I don't think most people will be able to get through that. We won't be able to. We've outsourced a lot of the things that we should be doing here to other countries. We've we have now we have niches of people who have the skills that produce food for us. For example, we have machines that produce food for us. I don't think we would survive without electricity. And think about about internet as well. Without the internet, how far are we going to get as a society? We can't share information with one another. We can't get in contact with people across the world. It'll just lead to bigger and bigger problems, and most people aren't going to be thinking about Bitcoin at that point.
Yeah. You have bigger problems, I think. I think you have bigger problems.
Yeah.
So I became aware of this about maybe 6 or 7 months ago. You were posting about this on X. And so, just for our audience, can you tell us a little bit about the CFA Institute's investigations on you for posting about Bitcoin on X? Maybe just sum up a little bit about what happened, what the backstory is, and where things are at now.
I was going on a crazy spree of just posting about Bitcoin, being extremely bullish, and it seems like people thought that I was too bullish. They thought that, oh, this guy is making claims that are unrealistic. For example, I had a couple of posts where I said Bitcoin's going to 100,000, a million, 10 million, and $100 million. Keep in mind, at this time, Bitcoin was something like 30, 40, $50,000. It was much lower than where it is today. It's already hit $100,000. So eventually it'll hit $1 million. Then it'll hit $10 million because of supply and demand. So a lot of people didn't quite like this. They reported me to the CFA Institute. The CFA Institute came back to me and they said, what are your basis for these claims? And I made a course in the past, just Bitcoin for Beginners course.
Mm.
It was just a 2 hour video where I was explaining what the use case for Bitcoin is, why I think Bitcoin is going to much higher levels than where it is today. All that all that was I sent it to them and then they came back to me. They said, but you're not answering all your questions. You're saying that Bitcoin is going to $1 million, Why are you saying this? What is the basis here? How are you even going to get to this point? How are we ever going to get to this point? It's not possible. So I told them, I just responded back to them. I said, do you say this to people who recommend buying index funds? I see constant posts about people saying, "Oh, you should buy index funds, you should buy real estate." But do you question them on do you question them on the basis of their argument where real estate prices are going to go up forever? Bitcoin price, I mean, stock prices are going to go up forever. They never get questioned. If you go on Twitter, you're going to see constant posts about this. People are going to be posting about this regularly. So I said that to them, and then this actually escalated the investigation to the head of the department, and the head of the department said, "You're good. Just make sure that you differentiate between opinions and facts." And I'm perfectly okay with that. That makes a lot of sense. But over time, I mean, I think the CFA Institute is going to figure it out. They dropped my investigation, which I mean, if they didn't, I would have a lot of fun with just talking about them on social media, and it'd be extremely valuable for the other people who are maybe pursuing the CFA, whether or not it's even worth getting the CFA charter if the CFA Institute is so backwards, right? And over time, I think more and more people are going to figure out what Bitcoin is. I think the CFA Institute is going to figure it out. I think the people who complained about me are going to figure it out, and that's inevitable. Those people are going to own Bitcoin. They're probably going to own Bitcoin at much, much higher levels than where it is today. But as a summary, the investigation started based on me making certain claims about Bitcoin. Now it's done because it seems like I was right.
That always helps. That always helps, doesn't
Absolutely.
it? And
Yeah,
I
for
guess
sure.
that's the challenge, though, isn't it? Like what you were saying with traditional investment asset classes, we've got a pretty long track record of average rates of performance. And so I guess, relatively speaking, it's more reasonable to speculate about where the S&P 500 index will be in 21 years' time, right? But when it
Yeah.
comes to Bitcoin, because we have a shorter time frame, that spectrum between opinion and fact is a little bit of a different scale. And so that kind of has to be taken into consideration when you're passing your opinion. So I guess that does mean that we have to be responsible, but at the same time, it does, it resonates with me because it kind of feels like with traditional finance, the entire system, the institutions within it are not, I guess, sufficiently open-minded enough to allow people to genuinely get wealthy. Because when the opportunity of a lifetime comes along, people get blocked for their safety, I should add. It's not like they're doing this from malicious intent. It's for their safety, and they're motivated by all the right reasons. But what does it suggest? Like, does it suggest that it's going to be a long haul? There's going to be a battle. There's going to be a few dead bodies along the way before mainstream finance actually accepts Bitcoin? Or do you think now we have well and truly passed the point of no return? Like it's D-Day, not yet V-Day, but we're on our way.
I think we've already gotten past that. I think we're already with the ETFs, for example, we have BlackRock promoting Bitcoin. BlackRock has $11 trillion of assets under management. We have companies like Fidelity, Van Eck, all these other institutions, Cantor Fitzgerald, I think that's what their name is. They're promoting Bitcoin. There's always going to be people who want Bitcoin. And unless, let's say, something fundamental changes, let's say, for example, we wake up tomorrow and suddenly the supply is 42 million.
Mm,
Honestly, I don't know how that would happen, but maybe that would change my thesis. So I'm not going to always say that Bitcoin is going up forever. It is, there is moral responsibility here where I think Bitcoin is a much better form of money and it'll stop people from buying real estate as a savings vehicle. It'll bring housing prices down. But let's say, for example, tomorrow Bitcoin fundamentally changes. That doesn't mean I'm going to keep holding. I'm not going to keep believing something that doesn't exist anymore, right? So over time, it could change. That could definitely happen. Um, but I mean, I think that there is no way to bring this back
yeah.
and bring it down to zero. I don't think we're ever going to go back to even 15,000, 20,000, $30,000.
Mm,
For that to happen, there has to be, like I said, a fundamental change in Bitcoin. For that, if that were to happen, more and more people will accumulate Bitcoin. If Bitcoin's price suddenly dropped to $15,000, I would go and buy more. I know a lot of people who would buy more. People would want to buy whole coins. Everybody wants to everybody who figures out how Bitcoin works wants to buy whole coins because of unit bias. I don't think we're ever going back to lower levels. Maybe we go back to like 70, 80,000, but I don't think we're ever going to go back to 50, 40. And for Bitcoin to be, I guess, reversed, for it to disappear, it has to go to zero.
Mm.
Bitcoin's value has to go to zero for it to have actually failed. And I don't think that's going to happen.
And I guess as long as there's a bridge between Bitcoin and fiat currencies, it's always going to be a relative game anyway.
Yeah.
So even if there's a problem in that quantum computing has now made it worth less, it's still probably going to be worth more, like going back to what you were saying before, than traditional financial assets because quantum computing will destroy that world far more than the digital world. So
Yeah.
on the topic of price, though, we recently hit $100,000, which is pretty cool. And yeah, depending on when we release this episode, it'll be somewhere around $100,000, we could say, or some other number. And we didn't see a pullback before we bust through 100, so it kind of came close, went a bit sideways for a bit, and then just busted through recently, which was I think personally I found that quite surprising. Were you surprised that it didn't pull back to like 70 or 80 grand before it made another run up, or
Yeah,
do you think that's still to come? Yeah.
I made a video. I made some posts about it going back to 70 or 80K, but I knew that I could be wrong. Nobody can really predict where Bitcoin is going.
Yeah.
You can predict what the supply is going to be, but you can't predict the demand.
Mm.
Nobody can tell you that, oh, some institution is not going to come in and buy every single Bitcoin under $200,000 tomorrow. Nobody can tell you that. Nobody can say that. Uh, you can also, it also goes to the other side. Nobody can tell you whether Satoshi Nakamoto will sell all 1 million of their coins tomorrow and the price won't come down. So nobody really knows where the price is going. It's all just guesses. It's all people trying to predict where things are going. And keep in mind that when you don't have exposure to Bitcoin, you always want the price to go down. When you have exposure to Bitcoin, you always want the price to go up. So I think that pretty much summarizes most estimates. The people who have zero Bitcoin want the price to go back down to $10,000 because maybe they feel stupid for selling early, or maybe they feel stupid for never buying at all. Maybe they just don't like the fact that they ignored it. But then the people who are overexposed, let's say the people who took on leverage, the people who bought as much as they can using their mortgage, they bought as much as they can using credit cards, and if something were to happen, if the price were to drop to $80,000, maybe they'd go bankrupt. And maybe they'd panic and they'd sell and they wouldn't be able to cover their debts. Those people want the price to go up perpetually forever, and that's not how this works. Growth always requires volatility. I did expect it to go down, but I was also open to being wrong. I'm always open to being wrong. I could be completely wrong on Bitcoin as a whole, but I don't think anybody's really been able to prove that to me so far. I did think Bitcoin's price would pull back, but it didn't, and I'm perfectly okay with it.
So what does it say then about where the price is going to go next in 2025 then? If we think further ahead, does this busting through at the start of December, the 100 grand barrier, does that signify that maybe the pullback could be more severe, or does it maybe signal that, hey, things could actually go a little bit further than what a lot of people have modeled already?
Yeah, I think it could go a lot further because the the key about the $100,000 level is that it's a psychological level.
Mm.
People see that Bitcoin finally passed six figures. Some people will continue to think, oh, I want to pay five figures for it, or I want to pay four figures for it. But I think there's more people who are willing to buy now because over time, as Bitcoin's price rises, it becomes less of a risk. It becomes less risky to own Bitcoin because if the price rises, more and more people are looking at it, more people want to understand it. I think it may have been Samson Mao or maybe Michael Saylor. I don't remember who said this. They said this much better than I did. But as the price rises, more and more people are interested in it. More high net worth individuals are actually looking into it because at $10,000, it seemed like a joke to them. At $100,000, the market cap is now $2 trillion. At $10,000, it was $200 million or so, whatever the numbers were. But now that the market cap is increasing, it just means that Bitcoin can accept more and more value from the legacy financial system being transferred into it. And that'll continue to happen as Bitcoin's price goes up. Because Bitcoin is a Veblen good, as Bitcoin's price goes up, more and more people will want it. Just like with gold. As the price of gold goes up per ounce, more and more people want it because they think that the price will go up even more. But then it goes the opposite way as well. As the price comes down, more and more people are thinking that the price is going to go down even more, so they want to sell what they have. And I think we're going to continue to see that push and pull. That's just how natural That's how markets are supposed to work. That's naturally how markets are supposed to work. There's supposed to be a push and pull between buyers and sellers. That's what a market is. The volatility is normal. The fact that we basically have no volatility in the S&P 500 makes me think that it's a completely fake market. And I don't know if you agree with this, but I think that because of this, because of the fact that it just keeps going up and it keeps going up, we can see that there is some kind of manipulation there. We can see that there is money flowing in where we can see that there are investors who don't want this thing to go down because they're so over leveraged. If the S&P 500 were to go back down to $1,000 or $500, I don't think it would recover because there would be so much pressure from people selling that have leveraged positions that I don't think that anybody would be able to
Mm,
cover all of that sell pressure. They wouldn't be able to bring in enough demand to cover that sell pressure.
yeah. I guess to a certain extent, because of how fiat currency is debased, it kind of makes everything into a Ponzi scheme, which is denominated in fiat currency, right? So if it is a Ponzi scheme, all investing, then
Yeah.
Bitcoin is a better one. And so,
Yeah.
like, if you think about going forward, actually, one of your posts, you mentioned that most people will keep on ignoring Bitcoin until it's over $1 million. So why would be one question. And then what do you think gets us to over $1 million from here? Nation states, BlackRock, like there's a big gap between 100 and a million. And if most of retail is kind of ignoring it until it's over $1 million, then something's got to push us there. What is it going to be?
I think what most people have a lot of trouble wrapping their head around is exponential growth. They think that, oh, it took 15 years for Bitcoin to go from zero to $100,000. So it'll take another 135 years for Bitcoin to go from $100,000 to $1 million. But that's not how it works. When when you measure investments, you measure them based on percentage growth. You don't measure them based on the nominal dollar value increase. If you were to go based on the nominal dollar value increase, it wouldn't make any sense to measure how investments grow based on those numbers because the nominal value is not relevant at higher and higher prices. So let's say, for example, when Bitcoin goes to $100,000, $1,000 swing is nothing. That makes it seem like it's absolutely zero. And Bitcoin is very, very well known to be extremely volatile. So that volatility requires bigger and bigger numbers to the upside and bigger numbers to the downside. So you may have seen Samson Mao, your audience may have seen Samson Mao talking about an omega candle, a god candle. The
Yeah.
omega candle is where it increases by $10,000 in a day. The god candle is where it increases by, I think that's what it was. I don't remember what the terminology he used was, but one of them is where it goes up $100,000 in a day. And that will happen. But keep in mind, it took 15 years for Bitcoin to get to 100,000.
Yeah.
It'll take a day for it to get to 100 to grow another 100,000 at some point. How long did it take for Bitcoin to get to $10,000? I think it may have taken at least 10 years.
Yeah.
Right? If it increases by $10,000 in a day, that means that you've gotten 10 years of growth in one single day. The point here is that over time, as more and more people figure out what it is, more and more people figure out how it works, they're going to want to put their money into it. And I think the amount of wealth that's moving from the legacy system into Bitcoin, it can't be fulfilled by the supply that exists. If you really think about it, there are 60 million millionaires in the world. There are only 21 million Bitcoin. So if every one of those millionaires wanted to be a whole coiner, they couldn't be, even if they wanted. Even if they tried to change the network, they wouldn't be.
Mm,
At most, 21 million of those people can be whole coiners. And right now, a lot of people own multiple coins. So let's say, for example, MicroStrategy owns 400,000 Bitcoin. The U.S. government owns something like 200,000 Bitcoin. BlackRock owns almost, I think they may have surpassed 500,000 Bitcoin. The ETFs as a whole own something like 1.1, maybe 1 million Bitcoin.
right.
Satoshi Nakamoto holds another 1 million Bitcoin. So for all the demand that's coming in, there won't be enough supply at these current prices.
Mm,
The way that I look at markets is that I think this is a great concept that most people don't quite understand. Price is determined at the margin, meaning that you can only pay for Bitcoin that's available for sale. Even if there's 21 million Bitcoin, but only one Bitcoin is on sale, that doesn't mean you can get two Bitcoin. If
mm,
there's only one Bitcoin for sale, you have to find people at higher and higher prices to sell you Bitcoin, to give you the Bitcoin that they have. Maybe I don't know what the time horizon will be. Maybe it'll take another 10 years for Bitcoin to rise another $900,000 to $1 million. But I think in that time, people will continue to think this is a scam, this is a joke, this is something that's going to zero, it's
Mm,
not going anywhere. So all these people who have barely even started studying Bitcoin, they're not going to start buying until it goes much, much higher because they have no idea what it is. If for me, for example, it took me uh 3 years to really understand what it is, to put the majority of my wealth in it. Most people will not do that until it goes much, much higher because it takes time to wrap your head around what this thing is, to wrap
mm,
your head around the concepts that this thing relies on to actually be what it is.
mm,
And we have all these institutional investors who are buying billions of dollars worth, hundreds of millions of dollars worth. If that demand keeps going into Bitcoin and people keep buying Bitcoin and there's no more supply available at these prices, then what do you think somebody's going to pay for Bitcoin in 4 years, 5 years, 10 years? These same institutions, they're going to be paying more than $1 million. And even by then, I think most retail investors still won't have figured it out. So over time, we're going to see Bitcoin is going to $1 million much, much sooner than we think.
mm.
Like I said, maybe 5% at most, 5% of the world owns Bitcoin right now. What's going to happen when the 95% want to own Bitcoin? All that capital is going to flood into Bitcoin. All that money is going to flood into it. Of course, there's going to be sellers along the way. People are going to sell their Bitcoin because they have so much. For example, we had a lot of people selling Bitcoin at $100,000. Maybe we'll see another bunch of people selling Bitcoin at 200,000, 150,000, 300,000, 500,000.
Mm.
But over time, because the demand will outpace the supply, the price will have to go up. Otherwise, there's no more supply that comes into the market.
This is a really hard concept to get. You're right, and I think you said it right. Like we all have issues really appreciating the implications of an exponential curve. Hockey sticks are harder than baseball bats in terms of
Yes.
like, trying to piece this all together. For you, it took 3 years before you properly went all in, and if that would be, if we kind of multiply that with general population, that would be like a model of how a rational investor would come to a conclusion. But as the price starts to appreciate, you get more irrational exuberance that enters the market as well. And touching a little bit about what how you see 2025 unfolding, do you see that as the price kind of stays consistently over $100,000 and media starts to finally pick up on the story and most regular people start to understand what's going on, do you feel like people are going to bypass that research time and just be led by FOMO and just pile in?
Yeah, that's what's going to lead to a massive bubble, right? We're going to
Right.
see a lot more retail. I don't think most retail investors have even started figuring it out yet. Like we said before, people around us, they're not really buying Bitcoin. I think at some point they will start buying Bitcoin and they will FOMO in. And I feel like I don't think we're going to see the same kind of collapses that we saw before with 70, 80% with the with institutional investors coming in. For example, if Bitcoin were to drop 80%, Michael Saylor is probably going to put $1 billion into it, $10 billion, $100 billion into it, whatever he can get. We have these institutional investors as a backstop. So with these ETFs, for example, there are definitely people who want to buy the Bitcoin ETFs for lower prices. If the ETF price went all the way down to $30, there's probably a lot of limit orders that are going in and they're going to be executed at that price. So it'll just bump the price back up. So I think what we're going to see is I'm not sure if this is where the world is going, but I think that this what we're going to happen. I think we're going to see a staircase up. So we're going to see the price skyrocket, and then over the next few months, maybe move sideways, go up, down, go up, down. Maybe that's not the case anymore though, because we're in price discovery, which means that right
Mm,
now we're just trying to figure out what the actual price of Bitcoin should be, and market participants are basically setting that price.
mm,
Who knows? Maybe institutional investors start selling because they've made 50, 60, 70% returns. A lot of institutional investors who bought the Bitcoin ETFs at the very beginning have made 150% returns. They don't really need to make more than this to impress their shareholders. Their shareholders would be extremely happy with 150% return in a year.
mm,
We have retail investors who are willing to buy and hold for 10x, 20x, 100x returns. Michael Saylor is a little different. Michael Saylor is not like the typical institutional investor. He's like almost a combination between a retail investor who's willing to hold for a 10x, 100x, And at the same time, he's an institutional investor who can use equity markets, who can use the bond market to buy as much Bitcoin as he possibly can. And he'll continue to do that. So what we're going to see is because of him, because of the ETFs, we're going to see, in my opinion, the price doesn't drop as much as people think. There are so many institutions that don't own Bitcoin yet, and they need to own Bitcoin
Mhm.
because otherwise they're going to have all of their wealth stolen from them through inflation. And this is the demand that's coming in. We're going to see this demand over the next few years. We're going to see the demand increase significantly.
So you mentioned Michael Saylor a couple of times. So recently he suggested, I think it was during one of his presentations, that over a 21-year time frame, he would use a compound annual growth rate of 29%. And so when I was doing the numbers over 21 years, $500 per month if you start from zero, if you use 29%, that works out to be about $8.5 million in 21 years. Pretty big number. But it still seems a little bit ridiculous. Some people think that's ridiculously low, though. So, in your mind, what would be a reasonable CAGR to use if you were modeling what the price of Bitcoin would look like in the future?
So I've created a spreadsheet in the past where I did do the estimates. I had the estimates of 35% for the next 10 years and then 30% for the following 10 years. So it's pretty close, actually. It's
Yeah.
actually very close. And I made that spreadsheet before his presentation.
Okay.
Um,
He copied it,
so I
Rajat.
think
He
our
copied
numbers are
it.
pretty close.
Yeah.
Maybe he's right, but I think there's also the possibility that we see the adoption happening a lot quicker than he thinks. He thinks that at least this is what I hear from him. He thinks that that Bitcoin can't be replacing the US dollar at any point in our lives and the US dollar will always exist. I don't know if that's the case. That's where we differ. I think Bitcoin's return could actually increase over time. Maybe we could see bigger returns over time. I think we may not see the same diminishing returns that we saw in the past. Maybe this is the beginning of the S curve where we just go vertical and Bitcoin in this cycle goes to maybe this is completely just a random guess, but maybe Bitcoin goes to $1 million this cycle
Mm.
because of all the demand, because of all the money that's coming in from institutional investors. The sellers will run out. Eventually, the sellers will run out, but the buyers will never run out. Even the people who have Bitcoin will continue to want more Bitcoin.
Hmm.
So the people who have, let's say, 50,000 Bitcoin and they want to sell. This actually Germany comes to mind here. Germany sold 50,000 Bitcoin at about $55,000 and now they're going to be ridiculed for a very very long time about the stupid decision that they made. So over time, the sellers do run out because Bitcoin has to be owned by people. In order for somebody to manipulate the market, they have to actually sell Bitcoin. They may be able to do other things. Maybe they may be able to manipulate the futures markets. Maybe they'd be able to do other things. I don't know what else they would be able to do. But I think what most people forget about is that there's an opportunity cost when you're selling Bitcoin. You can sell Bitcoin, you can try to manipulate the market, but you may never get that Bitcoin back again. So if institutional investors try to manipulate this thing, if they try to do whatever they can to stop it from working the way that it does, then I think they're going to be punished. So back to the main thing that we're talking about here. As the sellers run out, price goes up. So we may see that more and more dollars continue to chase Bitcoin, more and more dollars continue to be added to the Bitcoin economy, the Bitcoin market, and the price keeps rising even faster than we think it will. A lot of people still think, again, like I said, that real estate will be a massive part of our portfolios. I don't know if that's going to be the case. A lot of people still think that stocks will be a massive part of our portfolios. Again, I don't think that's going to be the case. People buy stocks blindly because they want to be passive investors. Now you can passively buy Bitcoin. You can divert the funds that were going into stocks and put them into Bitcoin. Value isn't created, it's transferred, especially monetary value. It's transferred from other assets to whatever asset we have. So, for example, Bitcoin is now worth $2 trillion. That means that it extracted $2 trillion from other asset classes. Those $2 trillion could have gone into stocks, could have gone into real estate, could have gone into bonds, but instead they went into this brand new asset class. And over time, I think the extraction of wealth from other asset classes by Bitcoin is going to accelerate. I think that's going to be faster and faster as the price rises. More and more people are going to see that their real estate portfolio is worth a tenth of what it was today. It's worth a 20th of what it was worth today, or what it was worth in the past, 100th of what it was worth in the past. A lot of people will argue with me that, oh, we need real estate to live in. Housing will always be important. But I think those people are going to flip. They're going to sell their real estate properties. And where's that money going to go? It's going to go into Bitcoin. If they have a house that's worth $500,000 and they get $500,000 out of it, today one Bitcoin is worth $100,000.
Yeah.
Maybe they can get 5 Bitcoin for that $500,000. But as more people want to get their wealth out of the real estate market and move it into Bitcoin, we go back to the prices determined at the margin. We're going to see that the price of Bitcoin is going to rise and rise and rise. The price at this the amount of Bitcoin available at this current price will run out. It will eventually run out. I don't know when it'll happen. Maybe we test the 70, 60,000, $50,000 level again. But eventually, we're never going to go back to those prices again. And that's where I think the world is going. I think over time it could accelerate. But who knows? Maybe I'm wrong here.
Oh, we'll see. We'll see. There's been a few conversations that I've had throughout the year with people asking me that exact question. What are the risks? It's kind of obvious, but what are the risks associated with selling our investment property and just putting all of the net proceeds into Bitcoin? What could go right? What could go wrong? But that's just like one tiny glimpse of all of traditional finance trying to jam itself into that tiny little bit of available Bitcoin left to buy. And I guess what we're saying over and over again here is that it's a hockey stick coming up, right? It's hockey night in Canada.
Yeah.
It's coming up, right? So recently I spoke to Peter Dunworth, whom I know you know, and we talked a little bit about the difference between risk and volatility, risk being the chance of a 100% loss versus volatility just being the degree of price uncertainty. So in your own personal Bitcoin allocation, or when you talk to other people about Bitcoin risks or custody risks specifically, how do you personally deal with it and how do you professionally deal with it?
So I've more recently started showing people this chart of Bitcoin's 4-year return. Sorry, I'm just going to pull it up here.
Sure.
I've started showing people this chart of Bitcoin's 4-year returns.
Cool.
So this chart, it just shows you Bitcoin's moving average price over the last 4 years. So we can see here in July of 2014,
Mm.
Bitcoin's average 4-year price was $133. And over time, this has gone up. It never decreases. We see here $1,000, then it goes to 2,000, then it goes to 3,000, then it goes to 4,000. So if you have a 4-year time horizon, you're going to do extremely well, no matter what price you buy your Bitcoin at. If you can buy $5, $10, $15 worth, buy Bitcoin with money that you don't need for at least 4 years. If you need the money within 4 years, I wouldn't recommend buying Bitcoin. To be honest, I would say just keep cash. You don't need to buy index funds. You don't need to buy stocks. You don't need to buy real estate. Of course, not real estate because it takes so much time to buy and sell, and there's all those fees involved. But I don't think that you should buy Bitcoin with money that you need within 4 years. If you need money within 4 years, just keep it in cash. Keep it in maybe a GIC, a CD, certificate of deposit, or try to just increase your income. If you need money within 4 years, try to increase your income and try to make more money so that you can fulfill your obligations, your financial obligations. But with Bitcoin, the risk here is in holding in holding for less than 4 years. So for example, if you bought up here in 2017 for $20,000 or so, whatever the price was back then, if you held for a year, you would have lost 75% of your value. There will be volatility. We'll keep seeing price go up and then coming down, and going up, coming down, going up, coming down. Something that Peter Dunworth says really well is that this thing is going to rip faces, and I definitely think that that's what's going to happen. I had a conversation with him as well. I think the way that he says it is great. This thing is going to billions of dollars because Bitcoin is the best form of money that has ever existed. We're never going to see a form of money that can be a store of value, a unit of account, and a medium of exchange all at once.
Mm.
We're never going to see that happen again. This is the best form of money that existed.
Mm.
All of the value from the legacy system is going to go into this, but over time, we're going to see the price go up and down because people will gamble on it. They'll sell early. They'll use leverage and they'll make the wrong decisions. They'll lose money.
Mm.
But if you hold for long enough, the sellers at every price will run out. We aren't at $60,000 now because there's no sellers who are willing to sell for $60,000. We're
Mm.
not at $40,000 because there's no sellers that are willing to sell for $40,000. We're not even at $90,000 now because nobody exists that wants to sell for $90,000. Over time, people buy and they hold for longer and longer terms, meaning that there's less Bitcoin to be bought today. That's where the volatility comes from. The price will continue to move up and down. It'll continue to whipsaw. But the thing is that if you have a long enough time horizon, you'll be perfectly fine.
Mm. Thank you. And so, as it relates to the possibility of loss through things like custody risks, how do you deal with that?
I think one of the greatest ways that you can one of the best ways that you can store your Bitcoin is to either use multi-sig with another party holding keys for you. What that does is it makes it so that if somebody were to randomly guess those seed words, the chances of that are very, very low. But if somebody were to randomly guess them, then they can't take your Bitcoin from you because if somebody guesses those seed words, they have access to your wallet and they can take your Bitcoin. The chances of that are slim to none, closer to zero than I would say to even 1%. But I mean, the good thing with multi-sig is that you can keep your keys in multiple locations. So, for example, if you wanted to keep your keys in, let's say you have a private key in Canada, you have a private key in France, then you have a private key in Australia. For somebody to steal your Bitcoin, they're going to have to get two of those three keys in order for them to actually move your Bitcoin. Even if you wanted to move your Bitcoin, you'd have to get two of those three keys. If you don't have access to those two of three keys, you can't move your Bitcoin. I think that's a great way to do it. There's also Peter Dunworth's company. They do a great job with something called collaborative custody. So with collaborative custody, what you're doing is you're having Peter Dunworth's company hold one key, then you're having what are they called? Unchained Capital, for example.
Hmm.
You're getting them to hold one key and then you hold one key yourself. The issue with that is that although the chances are very, 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 very low that Bitcoin Advisor and Unchained Capital will collude, the chances are extremely low. They're not zero.
Mm.
I think that's a better trade-off to make than keeping all of your Bitcoin in one key,
Hmm.
having one key, your house burns down, your Bitcoin is gone. I think those are things to really think about. But over time, I think it's just gonna get better. It's just gonna get easier and easier to store Bitcoin. There's going to be better custodians. Custodians will give you, let's say, for example, if you wanted to keep your Bitcoin with a company like Bank of New York Mellon or Coinbase, maybe they'll give you a specific address or they'll show you their balances. I don't think that's really available yet, but it can be.
Mm.
And I think that's going to be the case over the next few years. Unless companies are really trying to run a fractional reserve banking system with Bitcoin, I mean, that's just going to completely collapse. In that case, they probably wouldn't share the addresses where they keep their Bitcoin, but I think over time they're going to be forced to do that because the
Sure.
market won't the market wants transparency basically.
Yeah. Well, you kind of have to have it, right? Like if there's going to be a
Yeah.
merger between digital and analog finance, it's going to really put a lot of sunlight on the shortcomings of traditional finance. And as it relates to custody, if I was going to trust my bank, for example, like if my bank was progressive enough to see the future and they switched to being some sort of service provider in the custodial space, they're going to have to change a lot of how they do traditional banking as well, where they don't necessarily disclose how the money system works right now. So I
Yeah.
think that, but that is good, right? Because that's an example of how Bitcoin makes everything better, and you don't even have to be a Bitcoiner to be involved in it. In that case, it'll force a
Exactly.
good type of change. So finishing up then, tell me a little bit about your favorite piece of FUD, your favorite piece of fear, uncertainty, and doubt with respect to Bitcoin. And if you were to win someone over who holds that special type of FUD, how would you do it?
I think I think one of the most complex ways of thinking about Bitcoin and at the same time one of the stupidest ways of thinking about Bitcoin is that it's a Ponzi scheme. Because most people don't quite understand what Bitcoin is, first of all. They also don't understand what Ponzi schemes are. They don't understand that a Ponzi scheme needs somebody in the middle to be taking wealth, extracting wealth from everybody else. They think it's a pyramid scheme, they think it's a Ponzi scheme. What I would say is that with Bitcoin, there is no person in the middle. There's no individual that you can arrest. There's no individual that you can kill. There's no individual that's taking value out of the Bitcoin network. Everybody has Bitcoin. Everybody owns Bitcoin, and they have full control of it using the private keys, using the system that we have. So when people say that Bitcoin is a Ponzi scheme, it makes me angry because it makes it very obvious they haven't done any research. They compare it to tulips. They compare it to Bernie Madoff. They say, oh, Bernie Madoff gave these returns for this amount of time. But the thing is that Bernie Madoff was not transparent. He wasn't telling people how he was making his money. He just said, oh, we have our own state of the art way of making profits and then passing it on to investors. That's not the case with Bitcoin. How I would explain it to investors is that there's nobody in the middle. There's nobody that can stop this from continuing the way that it is. Nobody can move your Bitcoin without your permission. Nobody can extract wealth from you. And I would actually go into talking about how the current financial system is a Ponzi scheme, how treasuries are a Ponzi scheme, how the stock market, in a way, is also a Ponzi scheme. And over time, I think I can probably convince people by telling them, hey, you can create dollars out of thin air, but you can't create Bitcoin out of thin air. Just think about that. Once you see that, once you think about that, it becomes very obvious that this is not a Ponzi scheme. It's not going away. The people who own Bitcoin paid for it. They put their value, their wealth, their time, their energy into it. So this thing isn't a Ponzi scheme. People aren't trying to exit it quickly. A Ponzi scheme is something where you're buying something that has literally no value. There's you're buying something that has no true value. It can't really do anything. It doesn't really help society in any way. That's in my opinion what a Ponzi scheme would be. It's just a way for investors to concentrate their wealth with some person in the middle who wants to become richer. And that's exactly what happened with Bernie Madoff. So I think that Bitcoin is not a Ponzi scheme, and that's something that I constantly hear. I
Mm,
think most people will need to study this to figure out that it's not a Ponzi scheme and to see where it's going.
mm.
Over time, I think people will see it. People will figure it out.
So it's kind of like those who believe it's a Ponzi scheme don't realize that they're already operating in a Ponzi scheme,
Yeah.
and those that believe there's no value in Bitcoin, no intrinsic value, is probably, in my experience anyways, usually just a sign that the level of education hasn't yet enabled them to come to that conclusion of what the value is, because it is a relative thing, and that takes time because you kind of have to see how broken one thing is to see how perfect another thing is. And if you already think that something is perfect because you're a New York Times subscriber or something like that, no offense, New York Times, then it's going to be harder, right? It's kind of in the way. And
Yeah.
yeah, and that just takes time. Okay, so thank you for this conversation today, Raja. Like, if people want to follow you or follow some of the posting that you do, like I follow you on X, so why don't you share your X handle, and also where can people find you outside of X?
Yeah, absolutely. So I have a YouTube channel where I talk about Bitcoin regularly. All my videos are about Bitcoin. Some of them are about MicroStrategy, but Bitcoin and MicroStrategy go very well together. So check
Okay.
me out on YouTube. It's Rajat Soni Finance. If you just search for Rajat Soni and then Bitcoin, you'll find me. Same thing with Twitter. It's Rajat Soni Finance. The finance doesn't have an I, too many characters. But other than that, I do post on Instagram a little bit. I haven't posted in a while. I have a newsletter. I think the best place to find the two best places would be YouTube and Twitter.
Yeah, awesome. I appreciate that. Thank you very much, and all the best for 2025.
Thank you, Darcy. Thank you for having me on here. You as well.
No worries. Thank you.